Welcome to the Truth, Hope, Grace podcast, brought to you in conjunction with It's Not Over. I'm with Melody Oseguera today, and in today's episode, we're tackling self-esteem, self-confidence, and you're going to learn the key elements in how we see ourselves navigate life's challenges. So if you've ever felt not good enough or struggled to find your footing, this conversation is for you. Together, we're going to explore how to rebuild self-esteem, boost your confidence, and step boldly into the life you are meant to live. Let's dive in. Hello, I am back with my friend Melody from It's Not Over, and today we're talking about building self-confidence after setbacks and failures. Hi, Melody.
Hi, hope you're doing well today.
I am, thank you. Well, I'm excited that we're podcasting again, and for our audience to know, we are going to get on a good rhythm where we're doing this together at least, once a week. So
yeah,
I'm excited.
Me too. Sure.
All right. So today we're talking about self-confidence. And I think that all of us can relate or remember at some point in our lives where we have not felt confident, and especially after something that's happened in our lives where we feel unworthy or we're just really down on ourselves and hard on ourselves. And so we just want to talk to the audience today, if anybody's going through that, just how to deal with it and, kind of just some steps that you can take in order to overcome them.
There's some reasons why our self-confidence is going to be negatively impacted. And it could be we've gone through something where somebody says something negative about us or, maybe a poor decision. So I think back when I was in 7th grade, I'd gone to private school for the first 6 years of schooling. And, there was like 50 kids in the whole school. Then I shifted to public school and there's like 30 kids in each class. Right. And so it was quite the culture shock. And, I was 12 years old or something like that. And, the groups had already been established and all of that. So it was very hard to come in. And we know that little girls are like somewhere between 10 and probably 16, maybe even older. They're just mean to each other. Right. And so I was going through that shift. And, I remember sitting in a class, an English class, and I asked a specific question. And the teacher said, "Are you stupid or something?" in front of the whole class. And so, and I'm sure it was some simple concept that I just didn't understand, right? But I was humiliated. And from that point on, I never asked a question in class, right? Mm-hmm. And it really did affect how I saw myself. But then later on in my 20s, after I moved out of my parents' house, I made some terrible decisions in my life and things that really affected how I saw myself. And so that too affected my self-confidence, right? And really my self-worth. And so looking at that, things that we do or things that happen to us can shift and maybe distort how we see ourselves and overall affect how confident we are in the things that we are doing. And other people do actually pick up on that. They actually can tell if we feel confident in areas or not. So
yeah. There's this TikTok or video that circulates around, and this guy is describing two women, and I'm going to paraphrase here because it's been a while since I've seen it, but it's like two women walk into a bar and they're both beautiful women, but one of them you can clearly tell is more self-confident than the other. She doesn't look like she needs the attention, like she's kind of commanding the room, and where the other woman is using her looks and her body and, the way that she talks to try to get attention, where the other woman doesn't need to do that at all. Mm-hmm. And so I think even like you're saying, when you look at a person, you can kind of tell immediately just the way that they carry themselves. Mm-hmm. Even with somebody walking, you can tell if their head's held up high or if they're staring down at the ground looking at their feet. So yeah, just made me think of that when you said that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely can remember different times where, I would hold my head low and all that. And it was just because of the way that I felt about myself, and all of us at one point in time, like you said earlier, go through and we struggle with self-confidence. And so one of the things that we want to talk about is how do we rebuild that, right? How do we get to the place where, we experience some type of setback or some type of failure and we're at the lowest of lows? What are the steps that we take in order to kind of lift ourselves back up?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's something that I have one client in particular right now that I'm working with on is building his self-confidence. For so many years, he has just been beat down. And I mean, even going through a job loss, going through a relationship change, going through changes in his relationship with his children. And so this is something that, is not going to happen overnight. It's going to take some effort and some work and, just figuring out and you're going to talk about this in a second, but figuring out who you are. And even for us as believers, who God says we are. And then also living in line with that and, sticking to that and being accountable to ourselves, our commitments that we make to ourselves. And so I think that's really one important piece on how to build that confidence back up.
And I think the very first step in realizing, that we need to work on some things is obviously owning it, right? Owning the failure. So many people will try to live the life of denial, that I'm okay, it's not bothering me and all that. But I can think back to the conference I was doing, and one of the gentlemen came up to me and he said, like I've been in denial about how my bankruptcy has affected me. So I lost my business. I had to file bankruptcy, and that affected me as a man in such a way that I just began to try to numb it out. And he said, first started with alcohol, and then I ended up having an affair on my spouse, and then, things just spiraled out of control. And he said, I have not been honest with myself how that affected me, because I did not want to face the failure. I didn't want to face what that meant about who I am. But I think that's the thing, is so many times we tie our identity or self-worth into, the circumstances that happen in our life. Right. And we have to remember that mistakes and setbacks and failures are just a part of life, and how we look at them really makes a difference. But it's not who we are. It may be something that we've done, but it's not who we are. We can't take on those things as our identity, which we talked about a little bit the last podcast that we did. But we can't take those things on as our identity. But we also have to be real with ourselves that, hey, we've made mistakes. Maybe I am not the best person when it comes to leading a business. Maybe I should get some help. Maybe I should get a mentor or something like that. It doesn't mean that you completely give up on the dream, right? You don't want to completely say, okay, I'm never going to, run my business, or I'm never going to, be a leader in this organization or whatever. It's just, you recognize the setback, you recognize what you contributed to it. And then also even identify what somebody else may have contributed to it. Right. And the things that you can control, you fix. The things that you can't control, you let go of. But what happens to you is not who you are, or what you do. Like the mistakes that you make they don't define who you are.
Correct.
You do have to be accountable for those things. That's where people can get that mixed up on the other end. One is like completely, I'm a terrible person and this is my identity. And the other person is like, I don't have to be accountable for anything. And that's not a good thing either. There's a balance in recognizing that I have to recognize this isn't who I am, but I also have to recognize that I did mess up.
Right.
Need to change behavior.
And I think that some people are afraid, going back to our last podcast, like you said, there's fear in taking ownership of what you've done, because then there's that shame that follows that and that says, I'm a bad person, or, I've done such a bad thing, I'm not worthy. And so, and there's so many people out there that I wish would realize that like you're saying, it does not make you a bad person. It's actually more respectable that you can actually admit your faults and say, I messed up and I'm accountable for that. That shows a lot more than not saying it at all and masking it or pretending and hiding behind really who you are as well. Let me give you an example. There's somebody that I've worked with in the past that's like, has a really hard time owning up to their faults. And what this person does is will justify how great of a person I am,
Mhm.
but never admit to any of the wrongdoings, and will makes this person feel better if I give you my long list of credentials and here's why I'm such a good person. And that, I mean, people see through that. People
Mhm.
see through that, and that's not taking ownership and accountability.
I can tell you, just I've worked in different areas in life and different organizations and stuff like that, and it's always the leaders that say, "Hey, I've messed up, or I've made a bad choice, and I'm going to own that and move on," and that actually creates more respect, and I'm thinking of this one particular leader that I used to work for when I worked in the credit union world. And he could walk in a room and like just command respect from people. It is because number one, he believed in his people and he invested in his people, but he also would own, oh, that didn't work out, and the buck stops here. That's how he
Yeah.
always approached the situation. And you can't help but respect somebody, even if you don't like what they did, you can't help but respect for somebody for owning like their mistakes, right? And
Right.
I always, oftentimes, have reached out to him for leadership or mentorship because it's just like, teach me how to do that. And his thing is, the very first thing is that you have to be accountable for what you do, even if your intentions were good and they failed. You have to, own that part of it and not let your pride, because that's something that really keeps us. Even shame is rooted in pride, right?
Mm.
That is from achieving our goals. And we want to be able to influence people. And that's exactly what Jesus did, right? He was able
Yeah.
to, by the way he carried himself and him knowing his true identity, really bled through and affected other people. And when we hold ourselves to that higher level of accountability, then people will naturally follow us without, I mean, they'll see that we're human, and we don't want people to think that we're some type of God, right? Oh my gosh, the pressure to carry when somebody idolizes you, that's a lot of pressure to
Yeah.
carry. But you want people to learn to be accountable and hold themselves accountable, because that's really where people begin to respect you is, oh, they're not perfect. They do make mistakes. But the thing about that person is that they own them instead of playing the blame game or being the victim. Because a lot of times
Right.
people will be over that.
Yeah. And there's so much growth uh, in failure. There's so much growth in that, because when we've messed up, it's we're learning from that mistake. We're taking ownership and accountability for that. And it's really having that growth mindset rather than that fixed mindset. And so that person that I was describing to you has a very fixed mindset and cannot grow and learn from their failures and mistakes because they're not willing to speak of them. It's let me just shove it under the rug. And so yes, there's, think about all of the people that you and I know, or even people, celebrity type things in sports, right? That have failed so many times, but pick up and learn from their mistakes and continue to grow. And I think that in itself helps build your self-confidence, helps build your self-esteem.
Mhm. When you get to the place where you're not owning, right, what your part in it, you really put yourself in a holding pattern where you can't move forward, right? And so you're almost frozen in time, because we tend to repeat the cycle over and over and over again until we realize, oh, this is not serving me. And there will be some people that realize that and some people that don't. But I think it's an important point that we do see our failures and setbacks as opportunities for growth and development. And okay, now I know what doesn't work. So let me, reframe how I look at it, or restructure, have a new strategy of trying to achieve whatever the goal is. I remember listening to Zig Ziglar one time, because I used to like listen to everything he did when he was alive. And he talked a lot about really being real with yourself about what your strengths are and what your weaknesses are. And he said, so many times people will focus on their weaknesses and try to improve those things. And he said, it's not necessarily a bad thing to do that. But he said, the better thing to do would be to own your weaknesses, like just be transparent about those things, but to really hone in on your strength and try to, make those strengths even stronger. So if you look at it on a scale from 1 to 10 and your weaknesses are like 2 to 3 in some areas, he's like, you might be able to raise that up to a 4 or 5, but it would be much better that if you're a 7 on something that you strive for the 10, right? And so he said, but you can't do that until you're honest with yourself. There are going to be different people that have different skill sets. Like you and I were talking about this earlier. I'm not a marketer. I'm not. That's not my thing. And that is your thing. You have that gift. I'm more of the analytical side. And so, I can really focus on analyzing something or, which I know both of us are pretty good at kind of developing the content aspect of things. But if I focused on that particular thing and raised it up to a 9, that would be great. If I'm sitting here trying to fix the fact that I need to be a better marketer, well, that's not what God has purposed me to do, is be able to,
Right.
I'm not creative. So it's important that we recognize and be honest with ourselves. I do not have to know all the things, right? I don't have to be an expert at all the things. And if I waste my time trying to become an expert in marketing when God has called me to do something else, it truly is a waste of our time. And it could potentially be robbing someone else of the place that God has for them in that organization or in your life, right? And so allow, God has pieced different people together for reasons. And I do believe that that's what's part of what's going on here too. And because we each have our strength, and he wants to make those strengths even stronger together, better together. That's kind of my theme for the last couple of months, is better together. So
yeah, absolutely. I love it. And look, it's, I think about, exercises that, I may do with my clients, and you were talking about your weaknesses and your strengths. I think it's important to look at, like you're saying, like look at our weaknesses, not to make you feel bad about yourself, not to, focus and hone in on that, but to understand I'm weak in this area and that's okay. I mean, think about even when you go to a job interview, right? People ask about your strengths and your weaknesses. And some people, it's really hard for them to point out their weaknesses, and even their weakness is a strength. And it's like, no, you're not being honest with yourself. Everyone has weaknesses, but like you're saying, let's focus on elevating those strengths rather than trying to do it all. And I think that there's a lot of people out there that, in this perfectionism, I want to do it all, is robbing you of, like what you're saying, what you are really good at and what the gifts that God has given you. And alongside with that, also just being able to be compassionate for yourself and have that compassion to just say, it's okay. You're not a bad person. It doesn't define you because you can't do X, Y, Z, because what you're really good at, again, is the gifts that God has given you, the purpose that God has given you in your life. And so, just being able to treat yourself and not be so hard on yourself, treat yourself with kindness and compassion and respect.
Yeah. And going along with that, I do think that we need to offer ourselves grace. It's crazy. Sometimes we can be overcritical about ourselves in some areas, and then undercritical of ourselves in other areas. And so I do think that we need to offer grace. And the way you do that is actually get real with yourself. Offer grace. Like if it's something I would offer grace for somebody else, then maybe I should do that for myself. If it's something that I would expect somebody else to hold themselves accountable, then okay, I'm going to hold myself accountable in these areas too. So, and I think that's just where the grace of God comes in, because sometimes we don't have the ability to be compassionate towards ourselves, or offers ourselves grace. And so that's when we really just have to lean on the Lord. Okay, Lord, help me. Because there are definitely things from my past that there's so much regret. And I could stay fixated on that and say, oh, I wish I didn't do that. I wish I didn't do that, over and over and over again. But that's where the grace of God has come in and help me see that, yes, what I did was wrong, but to beat myself up up over it is only going to hinder me from achieving what he has for myself. So there is that compassion or grace that I have to have for myself in order to be able to move forward. And here's the thing. For me, there's been things that I've done and then things that have happened to me, and I cannot look back with regret because those things have shaped me. And although I don't believe that, I'm just some type of amazing person, I'm definitely flawed. I'm way better than I was when I was 20, I guarantee, or 30 or 40, right? There's been such a transformation. And it's like, as I surrender to the Lord and try to walk in what he's called me to do, I can't look back with regret because those things, and that's his redemption. Like that's the power of his redemption. He can turn take the ashes and turn it into beauty in our lives. And, that's why I just love him so much, because he does that again. Right. So
that's right. Well, and to give a little plug on Truth, Hope, Grace, like we are really focused on those words and what those words mean to us. And, what we teach our clients is speak truth. You've got to speak truth to other people and speak truth to yourself. That's, step one. Hold on to hope in hope and faith in Jesus, hope and faith in yourself, and then learn grace for yourself and learn grace for others. Mm-hmm. And so, it's something that, we're constantly repeating over and over again in our messaging, because those three things are so important. And, when you can start to speak truth to yourself and be honest with yourself, you are going to find that you're going to start being more honest with other people, but it's got to start with you. And I want you to talk to a little bit about kind of like that, focusing on yourself, bettering yourself, and how that helps overall with self-confidence and coming back from failures.
Yeah. So, in building self-confidence, and I'm thinking of a few clients right now that they're young people and they just don't have, one is about to emerge on the scene of graduate college and get a job. And she's really struggled with, being able to be confident in job interviews. And there was a recent little training that they went through college. I guess it's something that their university requires. And she was like really having a hard time. And I was like, okay, first of all, let's just take the pressure off, because you're not actually in an interview. It's a mock interview. So, don't be so hard on yourself. But the other thing is like, when I think of building self-confidence, the very first thing that I think of is our moral compass, because our belief system or a moral compass is the foundation of who we are. And if that foundation is strong, then the structure that we build is strong. Just like if I was building a house, right? The foundation is the most important part of building that home, because if the foundation is strong, it's going to withstand and survive anything that comes against it, right? Years ago, we had a hurricane, and, my house at the time, I lived on piers, and it was built in the 30s, and it was made of this stuff called shiplap, and it was like super strong. A big tree, it was a huge tree, fell on my house, and the roof didn't cave in. It didn't do any damage. All it did was shift my house 1 inch to the left.
Wow.
And it was because the structure was so strong, right? The foundation was strong, and the structure was so strong that it endured a tree falling on it because of a hurricane. And, in that, of course, I always feel like the Holy Spirit talks in those types of things to me, and, he was like, this is why it's so important for your life to be built on the foundation of Christ and to have that moral compass. And so whenever we do that, when we live according to the purpose that God has called us to do, when we follow the things that the Lord is telling us to do, I mean, his word is a map for our lives, right? This is the foundation. And if we live according to that, our structure is strong. Now, that does not mean that we don't have the storms. That does not mean that we don't have temptations. That does not mean that everything is going to be perfect, because it's not. But if my foundation is strong, then I can believe in him, but I also can believe in myself, and I feel better. I don't have to worry about what other people think about me. I don't have to rely on affirmations from other people to have strong confidence or self-worth. I don't have to do that because I know who I am in Him. And that foundation is built upon the Lord, and the structure of who I am is strong. And so I will point people to, what does your moral compass say? Now, not everybody that I've talked to is a Christian, right? And I understand that, but all of us have like this moral compass, or at least we should, these foundational principles that make up who we are. I would maybe some core values. That's what I would call them. And if I live according to these strong core values, then I'm going to feel good about myself, right? But if I am not living according to those values, then my confidence is actually going to go down. It's like, who I am. I have no idea who I am. And in the world today, that has happened. And I'm going to say, because fathers have left, mothers have gotten bitter. And I know that's probably going to, step on somebody's toes, but, I'm here to speak truth, like you said. Fathers have left and women have gotten bitter over it. And it has created this whirlwind of children not knowing who they are, children not having a set of core values. And so their identity, they're just trying to figure it out as they go. And so many times I'll have clients come to me and say, I don't even know who I am. I have no idea. Or I never thought I would do something like this. Why did I do that? Well, because the foundation and the core values, they're compromised or they're not strong. So let's find out, let's list the core values of what you truly believe in, what you expect of yourself as a person, or what you would expect of other people. Like, what are those things that are important? And when you begin to live according to those things and hold yourself accountable, to those things, then your confidence does go up. You start believing in who you are.
Yeah. Yeah. You just said everything that I was 7 years ago. And I'll get vulnerable for a second, because I was that person that you just described was me.
Mm-hmm.
I did not know who I was. I don't think if anybody asked me what my values, my belief and value system were, I couldn't tell you what they were. Didn't love myself, didn't respect myself. I did not have the foundation for myself, therefore left me in a state of not making good decisions, because I was not rooted in, even, in my faith. I wasn't really rooted in anything about myself, because I didn't know who I was. And so it wasn't until I started a relationship with God, it wasn't until I understood what that foundation was. It wasn't until I really asked myself, who am I? What are my beliefs and value system? And living according to that. And even, that affected my children. It affected because, at that point in time, I wanted out of my marriage. Therefore, left my children not being confident in their family, not being confident in their mother and father, not being confident in just the direction of their life, because I had completely disrupted that. Mm-hmm. And so, look, when you're lacking confidence and you're not owning up to it, you're kind of sitting in your setbacks and you're not growing, not only does it affect you, it's also affecting other people around you. And that's one of the really important things, like you're saying, is you may not think it's affecting your children, but it is.
Mm-hmm. And that is definitely why Satan wants to destroy this family as a unit. Right.
Mm.
And I've read numerous studies that talk about how children get their identity from their dad. They get different things from their mom, important things, mainly the nurturing, because we need that too in order to thrive. But, I've described raising kids a little bit like a rodeo. And so when you think about a cowboy, so to speak, and he's, I don't know if anybody's ever been to the rodeo, but, they're on a horse and they open the door and the horse is, bucking and all that kind of thing. I've been to a few rodeos, but I'm an expert. So if I'm using the wrong terminology, you know why. So, that horse comes out and that cowboy is riding that horse and the horse is just kicking. And that's how I see children. They're just wild and feral until the parents can learn to teach them to calm down. And so what you'll see is that the 8 seconds goes off and the cowboy tries to hop off. And immediately a lead horse comes in right next to that bucking horse, and it'll start calming down some, enough for the cowboy to hop off, right? If he hasn't been thrown off already. And then they bring in another lead horse to go right up next to on the other side of that bucking horse. And then that horse just calms down. And, that's how raising children is. And maybe I'm veering off into a different topic here, but children actually need both parents to calm them down, to make them strong. And if one of those parents aren't there, there's a loss for the children. Or if one of the parents isn't living according to a belief system or a value system, the children they really do watch us. They watch everything. I remember years ago when I was a kid, when I was 16, my dad was diagnosed with cancer. And, he was believing that the Lord would heal him. And I remember watching my mom, sometimes I'd get up late at night, go get a drink of water. That's when we drank water from the tap. Anyway, and I could see from the kitchen to the living room, and my mom would be in there praying and praying and praying and praying. Right. And, not that I was critical of that. I would just be like, man, being up all hours of the night praying, that's kind of crazy, But when my own crisis hit in my life, because all of us go through some type of crisis, that I was able to pull from that, right? Yes. I was able to pull. My mom prayed, and so that's what I would turn to. I turned to the Lord and all that, and began to pray and ask the Lord to help me with what I was struggling with and all those types of things. And so our children really do look to us for that moral compass. So it's so important that we do that. And I mean, I've been a single mom before. I've been, a hot mess before. And, I've gone back to my kids and said, this was not the right way. Let me now, even as adults, talking through, like when they're going through their own crisis. Okay, I don't do it the way I did it when you were young. This is what I do now because I was still lost and trying to find my own way. Now I believe that these are the core things that you need in order to overcome the crisis. So I've done it in the wrong ways, and I've done some things in the right ways. But our children really do need us to follow that value system that we have and teach them the value system. Talk to them about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh man, that was so good. That's so important. And when you said, I was able to pull from my mom sitting there in prayer. And so you did that same thing in your life, and not that completely changed everything, but there's some people that don't have anything to pull from.
Right.
And I think that that's so important for everyone to hear. And even I'm hearing that right now as we're talking. When my kids go through a crisis and they look back, what are they pulling from? What kind of behaviors, or what did I model for them? Mm-hmm. And again, I know we're kind of veering off topic, but that was even really important when my husband and I decided to reconcile our marriage. That was one of the things, is we want them to be able to pull from something. Mm-hmm. And from that in itself, pull from that we tried. Mm-hmm. We're making an effort to put our marriage back together. We're not giving up. We're not calling it quit. And, just to recognize what a good marriage looks like. And he and I work on that every single day. And, obviously there's days where we're not perfect at it, but and I think for me, it's always in the back of my head. What are my children seeing when my husband and I have an argument, and how we reconcile that? And just really how we're living out our lives, spending time together, being intentional about our marriage, like all of those things. And so that was awesome. Thank you for saying that.
And so this is a little bit of a plug for Truth, Hope, Grace, and It's Not Over. You may not have a parent that has been that moral compass for you. You may have not had a parent that has shown you the right way. It's so important, no matter what your age is to get connected with people that can mentor you through that can lead you through a process of identifying what are my core values? Who am I? Now, this doesn't mean that the coach will tell you that,
right?
It will guide you in steps so that you can discover that. If you're a Christian, we're definitely going to point you to Jesus. If you're not, well, then we'll point you to your faith and whatever that faith is, right? But, helping you and guiding you to the steps that you need to take to discover who you are, right? And so that's just a plug to help, because some people just don't have that to pull from, that, their parents weren't here anymore, or they're absent in their lives for whatever reason. And believe it or not, there are times when the children are actually more mature than the parent.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, your organization and my organization both can help serve you in that way if you need that.
Yeah. I had a client recently, just within the last week. I hadn't heard from him in several months. And it was kind of one of those things where, he scheduled his appointment and then didn't show up, or just kind of kept making excuses. Well, when he reached out to me last week, it was because he's like, I don't have anybody else, and I need to talk to somebody. For that period of time, not that his life completely fell apart, but there was just no accountability, right? We were meeting every single week. And so he had that accountability to show up on these calls and working through things. So last week he was so relieved that will you take me back? So I was like, of course I'm going to take you back. And, but again, that's where people, if they can't talk to a friend or a spouse or a trusted individual, that's where, like you're saying, you and I come in the roles that we do, because it's important to have somebody that's going to be there to listen, but not just listen, but speak truth to you.
Right.
And you and I aren't here to rainbows and sunshine. We're going to speak truth. And sometimes it's going to be really hard to hear, but you didn't hire me to give you all the fluffy foo-foo stuff. You hired me because you need somebody to hold you accountable.
Right. So I have a health coach right now, and really trying to walk through the process of being sure that I'm eating in a healthy way and all that. And I saw her yesterday at church, and I was like, it is time for an appointment. I haven't talked to you in like 3 weeks. I'm off my game, and I need you to like reset me. And she was like, well, girl, let's talk on Tuesday, and we're going to reset you, and I'm going to, hold you accountable and maybe slap you on the hand a little bit. And I was like, that's fine. Let's do that. Right. You have to be willing to be accountable for your actions. So I'm glad he reached out to you, because that shows, hey, that on some level, he wants to be accountable. He wants change. He wants progress. So I'm glad. Good job for him.
And I think that this all ties back together. I know we veered off a little bit, but it does tie back together to that self-confidence, because even what he said to me, he said, the second I heard back from you in your text message that we had an appointment scheduled, I felt so much better about myself. And I didn't even say anything other than, sure, how does next Thursday work? And
right.
Really, that's all. Let's set our time, and I'll see you then. Glad to hear from you. And so when I spoke to him, like, that just helped him build his confidence, knowing that my accountability partner still wants to speak to me, and we're going to have these regular visits. And so anyway, tying it all back together, he got real with himself. And I'm feeling this such and such way. I need to reach out to somebody. I need to hold myself accountable. That in itself comes back to that self-confidence thing, because if I can make a commitment to myself that I want to change and do something, one of the things I love to say is nothing changes if nothing changes.
Absolutely.
And so he decided to make a change, and that the more that he does that, the more confidence he's going to build.
And as he takes steps to being the best version of himself, because some people struggle with things and other people don't struggle with those things. But as we recognize what our struggles are, what our strengths are, and all that, and I'm going to hold myself accountable for actually taking the steps, he will naturally feel much better about himself, And so when I work with a client, I'm always like, here are the 4 areas of life that you really need to focus on becoming the best version of yourself. And when you do that, you naturally begin, like, your value system gets stronger. You show up differently at work, differently in relationships, differently with your kids and all that. And when we are showing up as the best versions of ourselves, it builds our confidence, right? It just does. And so working on yourself really, really, it's crazy how that happens. But as you hold yourself accountable, working on yourself, whether it be through coaching or some other types of methods, you naturally feel better about who you are.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. As we wrap up, I kind of want to recap just for the audience. And so if you're listening to this and you're like, yeah, I don't know that I have a moral compass, or I don't know what my beliefs and values are. I want to encourage the audience to think about that and journal about it and write it down. And so number one, the first step is being honest with yourself, being able to just look at yourself in the mirror and say, I have made XYZ mistakes, but this does not define who I am. I am just taking ownership and accountability for them. Number two is that foundation, who you are in that moral compass and knowing what God's purpose is for you. And so if you don't know that, again, just sit in prayer, in meditation, in reflection, and journaling to, come up with, okay, I do know what my foundation is and what God's purpose is. And then you also said believing in God and believing in yourself. So I just wanted to point out those key things.
Yeah. It's so important to recognize that we are responsible for showing up as the best version. That's how we leave our mark on the world. And honestly, I listened to something that Mike Tyson said the other day. I'm not necessarily saying he should be our moral compass, but a kid asked him about legacy, and he was like, legacy is about ego, and nobody's really going to remember us after we leave. I don't know that I 100% believe in that, but I do like the fact that he was like, you can't have ego, right? Ego is the thing that's going to destroy you. I do believe, however, that we can leave legacy, but kind of the legacy that I feel like my dad left me was to always pursue God. And so that's really what I've told my kids. If you don't get anything else from me, nothing else, not money, not anything else, I want you to know that God is the answer to everything. Right. And so, pointing them towards that and living in a way towards that, it helps us leave our mark on our children, because, a couple of generations away, nobody's going to know who we are. Right.
Mm-hmm.
That's how you pass down the truth, is living it, walking in the fullness of what God has called us to do. And we feel confident about that. And that gives us the ability to be able to leave that for our children or for our loved ones or for our employees or whatever. And so when we're showing up that way, it continues to build that confidence that we should have.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Beautifully said. Well, Melody, another great conversation, and I appreciate you being with me today, and we'll be back next week.
Sounds good.
All right.